Welcome to today's episode of The Exceptional Caregiver's Life, a podcast about families navigating disabilities. I'm Wendy Robertson.
And I'm Liz Phipps. Today's episode, we will be exploring innovative and meaningful housing solutions in the developmental services sector. We are joined by two guests who bring personal perspectives and professional expertise to this important conversation. Together, they will share insights, challenges, and approaches that are reshaping how we think about home, independence, and community for those with exceptional challenges.
Bonnie Heath is a mother of 3 adult children and a grandmother of 4. Her middle child has Down syndrome. Bonnie began pursuing alternative housing solutions in 2007 with a group of 6 other parents. Not happy with the options available, they developed their own housing situation, Scarborough Residential Alternatives, which is still being run today and where Bonnie acts as president. Now, as Bonnie and the other families are aging, she is looking for solutions for the management of these children's homes. Zoe Kariunas is a registered social worker with over 15 years of experience in developmental services in Ontario and BC, working in supportive living, summer camp programs, post-secondary institutions, and individualized supports. Zoe has authored articles in the International Journal of Direct Support Professionals and developed extensive resources on housemate matching. She has helped well over 100 people move into homes in the community with Lights, which is a program of Community Living Toronto. Welcome, guests.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
So we want to start off by talking about the definition of home, but I think more importantly, how we will be redefining home in the context of this conversation. So just to start off, Zoe, can you talk to us a little bit about your role as a senior facilitator at the Lights program?
Yeah, so what we do at Lights is we help families plan for a living situation for their family member who's been labeled with an intellectual developmental disability in community.
What do alternative or creative, unique housing solutions mean to families?
Essentially, how I like to describe it is that it's a living situation that has been created specifically for the individual living in it, and it didn't exist before.
Is there a plan that families need to think about regarding their resources or budgeting or managing expectations when they're thinking about housing solutions?
So Lights uses a person-directed planning philosophy when planning with families. And how we do what we do is we start by meeting them where they're at. And we begin with the vision or the dream. And from there, we identify the important values that are shaping the plan overall and try to get the whole support circle on the same page. This is particularly relevant in Canada with its vast multicultural mosaic that does require a culturally informed approach to planning. From there, we move to the brass tacks, what is possible, and we begin to take stock of the existing resources, any new resources that might be available, and based on that, we create a budget from that plan. And families can start planning at any time. It's a journey, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the enormity of it. But there are many others out there on their own journeys that can make you feel less alone.
So you sort of answered my next question, which is around when families should start planning. I think that's so important and central to this process. Typically, when are families starting to look at the planning process? Is it when their child is still a child at 12, at 16, at 18? Or do you think it's more around when they're ready to think about housing solutions?
That's a really good question. I think families have so many competing priorities, and it's really important to sort of take stock of the priority of the day. And perhaps when your son or daughter, your child is in school, your priority might be a little bit different than when they graduate and they're now maybe in post-secondary, maybe they're trying to find a job, or maybe they're living at home attending programs, or maybe they're doing none of those things. So there certainly is an aspect of capacity to plan. I think it is helpful to think about it in some kind of ongoing way, with the gas turned up on planning once the capacity is there. It's important not to wait until you're 100% ready, because it's always going to be a leap. It's always a bit of an unknown, right? I think you're never 100% ready. So, start thinking about it once, maybe if you have other children moving out or people in the peer group, that's when those conversations can start coming up more and more, and in a real concrete way, both with your family member and with the rest of your family.
So, Bonnie, this leads me to asking you, when did you start thinking about alternative housing solutions for your child? Maybe give us a little bit of background on your family situation and what led you to start thinking about this process.
What started me thinking about it was actually an article in the Toronto Star. A couple that was 85 years old were going to pick up their son at his day program, and the weather was really bad that day, and unfortunately they got into a car accident and both of them were killed. So the son was put into immediate crisis and didn't have any other family. He had a brother, but he didn't live close to where he lived. And it just started me thinking, I didn't want to put my daughter in that kind of situation. I wanted to have it planned out and running well and everything before I got to that stage as well. So we actually started probably when she was about 15. We had a person-directed plan done to see what kind of things we could start with now and looking to the future.
How did you know to even get a personal directed plan? Like, did somebody recommend that to you?
I'm a member of Community Living Toronto, so they have a newsletter that comes out and gives you lots of information. And this was many years ago, because Jenny's now 40. We're kind of one of the first few to start having person-directed plans done. But I thought it was a really good idea to get her voice in there, see what she wanted to do, and sort of had to do some work about changing her mind because she was planning on staying with me for the rest of her life.
Right.
Yeah, that sort of leads to an interesting point. As a parent, what you think is the right future or right approach for your child versus, their rights and what they want. And you will have children who say, as I go into adulthood, I want to stay at home. This is easier. My parents cook for me. But at the same time, as a parent, you want to see your child soar. You want to see them gain more independence and life skills. So this question is for either of you. How do you sort of match those two up? Or conversely, the child saying, I'm ready to go, and the parent not ready to have their child leave. How do you sort of, mediate that?
This situation happens quite a lot where an adult child and their parents are not on the same page. They're not even in the same chapter about what the future might look like. And I think it's important to recognize that for many people with developmental disabilities, learning needs to be very concrete. Anything that's sort of abstract, like what this could look like, or imagine a future where you're not living with mom and dad like you have for your entire life, it can be very difficult to imagine. And I think for many people that have not had the experience of it, it is scary because I don't know what that is. I don't know. So I think having the opportunity to experience it for many takes away some of that fear. I would also add that is sort of a conversation between caregiver and individual. And I think it's reasonable and fair for a caregiver to say, I love being your parent, but at some point, I want to take a step back from being your day-to-day caregiver. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to go on vacation.
Yeah.
I want to be able to sleep in sometimes. I want to be able to do these things. And I think sometimes parents feel enormous guilt about that.
100%. It keeps me up at night. She wants to be with me for the rest of her life, and I'm just not going to be able to do that. So the guilt is overwhelming. My daughter is nonverbal and developmentally disabled, so she won't even understand that she's no longer living with mom and dad. Like, I can't reason with her. So that for families is so scary. So I'm relieved to hear that there are some resources out there for when families like myself get to that point.
What's interesting too, what you said there, Wendy, is that my son is in a housing solution and I still have guilt, right? He doesn't live with me and I carry that with me. There is relief, obviously, that he's safe and he's well cared for and I have some semblance of a life, but the grief still stays with me that I'm still not caretaking for a young man with autism and an intellectual disability. It's like either way, it's challenging, but yeah, it's an interesting perspective. Sorry, Bonnie, what were you going to say?
Just saying at this point now, Jenny's lived on her own for 17 years. She has a roommate and she talks about her home and it's not my home anymore. And when she still comes home for weekends, but she's anxious to get back home and she's saying, what time am I going back home? And we've even started transitioning her into staying on weekends as well. And she has a lot of friends. She's now in an apartment building. So she knows, I think, everybody in the building because Jenny's very social. She has a fantastic life. She enjoys her life. And so I think sometimes we need to get away from the guilt and we have a right as parents to have our own life, and they also have a right to have their own life, whatever that looks like.
Well, thank you, Bonnie. That does make me feel better. And you're right. We deserve a life too. So regarding, the funding, et cetera, for government policies for all of this, how is that deterred or helped you out? Like, how is it navigating that portion, Bonnie?
When Jenny first moved out, there was no kind of funding. And then when Lights came in, and this is just for Toronto, unfortunately, but there was some funding through them. So we were able to hire some support people to help them in the house. And since there was the two of them, we could split that cost because it was around general meal making and learning how to live on your own and living with someone other than family, right? That only lasts for a certain amount of time. And then we applied to the government for residential funding. And it took a little bit of time, and community living also helped us, but it's a small amount, but it manages for us to keep going.
I did not know there was a line item from the government for residential funding. I mean, I guess it depends where you live, right?
Yeah.
What would that be approximately? Can you share? Is it dependent on where you live and what the costs are going to be for rent and housing, things like that? Or what can a family expect?
Well, in our case, I don't mind sharing. It's just over $14,000 a year, which is, like I said, not a lot. Jenny and her roommate are very independent. So, and especially now because they've lived on their own for so many years, they've learned how to do a lot of stuff on their own. Yeah, so this was 14 years ago. We're still getting the same amount of money, right? So it gets thinner and thinner each year. We just keep finding ways of either doing things for free or cheap or, going to other services as well. And I'm sure, Zoe, you can explain a bit more on how that goes.
The challenge is there have been one-off, specifically sort of here in Ontario and in Toronto more specifically, there have been one-off pilot projects that have occurred over the years. But as it stands right now, there is no application pathway for any additional funding to support family managed living situations. So certainly there is a challenge that may or may not be the case in other areas of the country or in other countries. There may be more flexibility, but certainly it creates a disconnect and it creates additional challenges for families who often are requiring more funding to make this work, both in the short term and long term. And certainly in the long term, When families are looking towards sustainability, it's a major piece of the puzzle. A big piece of what we sort of have to do now with the budget is cobble together what existing resources are available, noting that there is no pathway to apply for this specific type of funding at the moment.
So would you potentially, if a family lived in a large city and they had few financial resources, would you look at housing models for their children outside of the city, more rural areas where cost of rent or housing is cheaper, but also recognizing that services and supports might not be there? How does that look? I'm curious.
You definitely hit the nail on the head in that perhaps rental costs might be a little bit less expensive, but transportation costs might be more expensive, so it might be offset. What we tend to look at is if a person sort of has a community, a natural community, family wants to live close, or the person has meaningful activities that they do in a particular community, we often look to, okay, where are additional resources outside of the developmental service sector? So for housing, that is often the municipalities for affordable housing. And each municipality has different priority areas. So in some municipalities, there might be at least a decade-long wait for rent geared to income housing, which is deeply affordable. Whereas in other municipalities, maybe there are more opportunities. It comes back down to values and sort of what could be available in terms of making it work financially. There's no one answer to that, I don't think.
Sorry, yes, I guess that would all be based on where the individual lives and what family, etc., that they have. So, as a mom, that's family that's just about to start this journey, and it's very daunting. What gives you hope for the future? What new initiatives if there are any new initiatives happening, or if hopefully things are in the works, but that's, obviously a flying unicorn, but we could hope, I guess.
I guess what gives me hope is the working on journey to belonging and looking at more personalized housing rather than the typical institutional type that's been around for decades. And they're looking at individualized funding. So unfortunately, our kids will have to be assessed, see what they can do, and then somehow there'll be a figure attached to how much support they need. And I can pretty much guarantee it's not going to be totally enough, but hopefully they do take realistic looks at it and what things cost today and work forward, right?
This leads me to asking, I think, an important question. So, Bonnie, we don't like to think about our own mortality, but in these cases, we really have to think about our own mortality. And the housing solution that your daughter has, there still is a level of oversight by yourself, your family. Who takes that on? I'm curious. What's the legacy planning for ownership over her future once your husband, your partner are no longer here? I know it sounds a little bit depressing, but it's also a very real question too.
Right. I have looked into microboards, but that's usually driven by the parent that is working on it. And it always worries me of the succession plan, who's going to take over that. Because like with my kids, they have kids of their own and families and jobs and, they're busy with all their stuff. So I'd like to see agencies take more on that role of managing, because families can, will still keep contact with their brothers and sisters, and they'll still, any friends they have will still keep coming, but it's managing the support staff and, paying people and all that kind of stuff that I would like to see agencies take over that part, and they would obviously charge a fee, and that would be part of the individualized funding.
Zoe, is that something that an agency would take on for future planning? Do you know if that exists or what that looks like or how families can advocate for that?
Well, I certainly can't speak for every agency out there. As Bonnie sort of mentioned before, we often find with family managed funding, you get some money, but it's not always enough to do what you'd like to do with it. And certainly a level of oversight from agencies does require a considerable amount of funding to pay that agency and those staff, especially if you get down to sort of more granular aspects of the budget. For example, if a family is paying a staff as an independent contractor versus an employee, moving to an agency would require more oversight and more costs for these things. So a lot of the barrier for agencies to take on oversight is there's just not enough funding to pay for their costs in managing that. There are some interesting projects happening where there are partnerships and people sort of involved with facilitation and oversight from the get-go. Those are still a little bit more unique. There is that sort of partnership and that shared decision-making, which is a piece that I think we need to also remember too, right? So I think it's obviously a topic about sustainability that a lot of families have. And there's no one answer. It certainly could be a possibility, but I think this is a piece of the plan that doesn't need to be figured out right at the beginning, but as certainly time goes on, talking a little bit more about that and more long-term sustainability is going to become really, really important for everyone involved.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point, and not to overburden a family by having to think about that as they're just starting their journey. And Bonnie, you raised microboards. Wendy and I did a podcast last season where we had a caregiver talk about her success with microboards.
Oh, good.
I don't need to go into that now, but it was really interesting. You can take a look at a previous podcast where we spoke about that. And it's a really fascinating concept that is working for her. So I think something for families to look into in the future. So just as we're wrapping up this conversation, we always like to leave on a positive note. And Bonnie, you sort of already alluded to the positivity in your daughter's life and how she is doing, how you've been on this journey a while. Can you just share a few other words about overall how your family is doing as a result and how she feels about all of this and how families should look forward to this as a possibility in their lives?
We've been at it for quite a number of years, but I still remember the day she was supposed to move out and thinking, oh my God, I can't do this, trusting her in somebody else's hands, all that kind of stuff. And it was my fear that would have held her back. But I had determined when I started this journey that it wasn't going to be me that was holding her back. I would figure out how to do it and not let her know that I was so scared. In the years that have followed, things come up, but we've managed to work through them. She went from not using a cell phone to, being on it all the time now. So it's like a typical person her age that's always on the phone. She has her friends in the apartment that she's in. They come up to visit her or she goes down to visit them. She's proud of her apartment. She likes to keep it clean. They still need help with the dinner hour and cooking a proper dinner. But that at this point is now the only assistance that they need. They spend the night by themselves, but they use technology to see if somebody was sick or something in the middle of the night. She is totally proud of herself at running her own home. She has assistants, but in her mind, she's running her own home. She gets to decide when she wants to do things. Quite funny, if I overstep my presence, she will often tell me. So it's been a great journey.
That's such a great way to end this conversation. I have so many more questions, but time is not allowing us. So thank you both for such an honest and insightful conversation. It's clear that while challenges remain, there is a need for momentum and creativity in rethinking housing solutions in the developmental services sector. To our listeners, we hope this discussion leaves you feeling informed and inspired about building better, more inclusive communities.
Thank you for listening to The Exceptional Caregiver's Life. I'm Wendy Robertson.
And I'm Liz Phipps. This podcast was made possible by Surrey Place and the Family Advisory Council. Special thanks to Caleb Buys for podcast support.
If you want to learn more about this topic or about Surrey Place and the FAC, please visit www.surreyplace.podcast.ca. Be sure to sign up for the Surrey Place newsletter by scrolling to the bottom of the page and hitting subscribe.
Stay tuned for our next episode. Bye for now.